Hi, welcome to the March 23rd meeting of the Kubernetes IoT Edge Working Group. On today's agenda, we've got Kilton Hopkins, who will give us a briefing on the latest updates to the ioFog open source project and how things going on there might relate to Kubernetes. I haven't had a chance to look at the agenda for the last hour, but that was the only item on the agenda last I looked. But as usual, we're open to people nominating topics for an ad hoc discussion or just free-form birds of a feather if we have time. So with that said, Kilton, let me make you co-host here.
Cool.
And you've got co-host if you wanted to present anything, so
Great.
Take it away.
I'll just do some screen share. So I'll have, unfortunately, I'll have to drop at 9:30 my time, so in 23 minutes, but it should be plenty of time for me to go through just some updates of the Eclipse ioFog project. And so thanks for having me go first, and thanks for putting this on the agenda. So the Eclipse ioFog project is doing a run of version 3 betas, and as of very recently, we're on beta 7 for some of the components, beta 6, beta 7, so that we can start to get close here to an official release of Eclipse ioFog 3. And what I want to do is I'll just basically look at and talk through the release notes, but to give the update of what's new and what's on the horizon there. But we're talking in the context of what we're learning as we get 3.0 out the door.
Yeah,
and
Kilton,
why. Yeah.
Let me stop you here just in case people drift into this or see the recording later. I know this is about the updates, but maybe just a brief summary of what it even is. Just
Very good point, right? It's I'm assuming that it's a certain audience, and it could actually be that the folks want to know the gist. It's great. Thank you so much for that. Okay, well then in that case, why don't I share my screen and land right on the root site for documentation and for the open source project and stuff. Very good call. So Eclipse ioFog has been around for quite a while, and it was originally, actually the origins of Eclipse ioFog they predate Kubernetes, and so at that time I thought, boy, somebody should be orchestrating microservices, and obviously what an undertaking. But I do remember someone here in Silicon Valley said, if you're going to orchestrate microservices, you should hear about this new project called Kubernetes. I was like, oh, I'll go check it out. But the purpose of Eclipse ioFog is to set an agent down on all devices that are capable of running the type of microservices that you want. The agent being very similar to Kubelet, but designed to run on devices that are regularly disconnected or under constrained bandwidth and constrained resources and so on. So in other words, it's an edge computing agent, and the purpose is to do your bidding in a way that complies with your control plane. So for those who are already looking into edge computing, it should be a really familiar concept. In fact, it's the architecture pattern that we now know dominates for distributed computing systems. You really want to have an agent on your nodes, and then you want to have some method of issuing commands, whether it's centralized or decentralized and so on. And so Eclipse ioFog started with this agent, and then of course had to add a control plane to it. As the years went on, we saw that Kubernetes was in a lot of ways taking over the world, or at least taking over the cloud. It became obvious that integrating the two was a really good idea. But we still have this ioFog control plane that's its own control plane, which might have some value in your Kubernetes-driven system, because you may need all of the specific controls for the edge, and you really want to interface between the two versus having all of your edge nodes directly connect to your Kubernetes infrastructure. The main theme here is there are options. right? And so I'll look at some of the integration parts. So you've got, it's not a mono repo. The Eclipse ioFog GitHub organization is a set of repositories for the different components. Open source, it's always a tough choice. Do I do mono repo or not? And we decided not. And you can see some of the pieces here. So we've got the agent I talked about, but then when we get into looking at how we interconnect with Kubernetes backend systems, we made a choice to use the Scupper project, which is a project that came out of Red Hat, which is really good for cloud to cloud, cloud to edge, et cetera, communication. And so we have here router and Scupper proxy are part of what we call the layer 7 or virtual application network overlay. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I go through some of the updates here. So bringing it back to like why you would use it and what it's for, Eclipse ioFog is edge application infrastructure. And so designed to give you the ability to stitch together a bunch of different edge devices such that you can deploy and manage applications across them and have them intercommunicate. And so that means that this layer 7 network gets laid down along with the agent, or it's rather the first thing that gets fired up. And then you can pass data between all of these edge devices, whether they're on the same network or not, right? Because we have this overlay. And so that's a concept that we call an edge compute network, or an ECN. And so you bring these themes together and you realize that edge applications require the hardware, but on top of the hardware, you've got the pieces that make the hardware come alive and host those applications. So of all of the pieces here, controller is that part that I mentioned that is the control plane, but it has a set of APIs. And so it was designed to be interfaced with other systems. And so obviously interfacing with Kubernetes is the topic of me presenting in here. And so we have an operator and a way to interface with Kubernetes systems. We are evaluating, of course, the extent to which we want to revise that. ioFog 3.0 is not centered around like a complete revision to how we interface with Kubernetes, but is rather an exploration into some particular features that had been requested, which I'm going to now go into, which is kind of the theme here of like what's new in ioFog 3 and what should you be paying attention to. So the first beta was all the way back in the fall, and let's start there to talk about what 3.0 has that the other versions didn't. Well, we made, of course, some updates that go along with the usual rolling of operating systems. But a key feature here is this concept, edge resources. And it's actually a really great day for you to be on, Kate, because this is exactly the area where you and your team are doing your work to identify and map up, right, things that can be found at the edge. There's so much room for collaboration here. We're taking a whack at it with this thing called edge resources because we need to have some data definition into our system. But ideally, I think the world would benefit from having a universal approach to detecting and identifying edge devices, objects, attached sensors, et cetera. But so that's in for ioFog 3. And it stabilized after just a few beta versions. So we have a lot more information regarding edge microservice logs coming up into the control plane, allowing for just some more remote debugging capabilities. And we had realized that we had the status for the edge microservices where you would see via the ioFog control plane APIs that, for example, a Docker container or Docker compatible container was pulling, but you didn't know how much. So you might see it in the state of pulling down for an hour and wonder, is something broken? But so we added in, of course, the ability to see through the control plane the detailed state of things. Additionally, a lot of folks were mounting volumes into their containers and then experiencing failures because, for example, the volume that they wanted to mount never got created on that edge device, and there was a lot of digging required to know what the problem was. So now, of course, we pass back some more information about what happened when trying to start up that microservice. Made some updates to the UI that is part of the ioFog project, which is called ECN Viewer. And this is a UI that just hits those APIs that I mentioned and gives you a visual display of what your edge environment looks like. So made some updates there and now include the edge resources capability. Let's see, we've got some bug fixes. And then there's also, I guess it's worth noting, because I haven't said it yet, there's this command line tool called ioFog CTL, which is really close to kube control in terms of the way that it's structured. And it's, of course, for dealing with all of the ioFog pieces. And so just added some capabilities to that. And that's where we came out with with beta 1 of ioFog 3. So we proceeded and added some more bug fixes and some more features to ioFog CTL and so on. And but then we began to upgrade some information in the controller, some features in the controller. So here's where I want to introduce the ever maturing feature that we have historically called public ports, but now are calling public services. And so we've talked in this very working group before a lot about like service mesh at the edge and how do you expose something like an ever running database that's on an edge node, and then maybe you have some vehicle is out and about and wants to deposit information in, but there are completely different networks. This one's over cellular, this one's behind NAT layers. And so what you want to do is find a way to expose services that are running as microservices somewhere at edge or cloud or whatever, and have those services available, but in a safe way. So this is using that Scupper project layer 7 network overlay. What we do is we expose, if you put the definition into your infrastructure spec, into your YAML, will open a publicly available URI that directly talks down to that port on that microservice with a proxy. The proxy is high performance. Obviously, there's always some losses, but you can even use real-time video streaming to a UI via this approach. And that opens up so much for the way that you operate your edge, because if you think about the types of data streams that you would like to monitor, but you normally have to bring up to the cloud, such as video, it's really expensive. So you say, I'd really rather only see a little snippet when there's something important. Well, what if you actually wanted to go and monitor the video stream, but just pipe it directly from the edge right into your browser window or right into your RTSP stream viewer? This is a way to do that where you never store the data anywhere in the cloud. It just moves directly. And so what gets exposed as a public service endpoint is related to where you're hosting your control plane. Well, that's perfect if you're hosting the ioFog control plane as part of your as like part of your Kubernetes deploy, because you can open up all kinds of networking there and open up the all of the pathways that you would prefer. And then when you open up the public service, it's just one more URI in your infrastructure. The difference here being that when you stand it down, there is no connectivity that remains to that edge node. And so it's a way that you can host anything from anywhere with an endpoint that exists like up in the internet at large, and then take it away when you don't want it anymore. So it's also really good for temporarily offering a service and then shutting it down. So that's getting more mature as we go. And then as we entered into this year, we started to address some security issues that were identified at large in some of the hosted Kubernetes infrastructure of the world. In other words, there was kind of a rash for a minute there at the big turn of the year of things hosted on various, and I'm not going to mention any details because that's the sort of thing that you'll know about if you are meant to know about it. On some hosted Kubernetes systems out there, the major cloud system stuff, there were some openings that were there by default. And so we added some protections against that, and then got that out the door. And then with the very latest, which just came out in the last 30 days with the beta 7 on ioFog CTL and beta 6 on the agent, we finally moved away from OS specific packages, right? Different ones for Debian systems and different one for RPM based systems. And now it doesn't really matter. You can pull from anywhere. And all that move required was that times had changed regarding the way that you install and configure Docker and things like that. And it no longer required special treatment on every system. And so on every OS. And so we finally were able to roll to a universal approach there. And that was just a nice little improvement. You can see that the changes from beta to beta are getting smaller and smaller. And that's because we're rapidly approaching the point of where we say, well, when do we want to push this out as a full ioFog 3 is now the standard version and so on. And we're busy at Edgeworks, and we've got a couple of outside contributors who can help as well. But we figure we'll give it enough time to settle in on this latest, and if we don't need any other changes, probably this summer is what we're planning for this. And so that's really the gist of what's going in. And of course, you'll see here things will change when we've added the third version. You'll get all of the official documentation will change here, and so the beta is for those who are working directly off the repo or who are using the ioFog Slack to keep up with the project and what's going on there. So that's the gist of what we've got in ioFog 3 and some reasons behind why we added what we added. Got some time for questions if anybody's got them.
Yeah, thanks, Kilton. That was a good overview, and I like the introduction too, because I think I had forgotten some of the aspects of it over your appearances over the last few years.
It's been a long time, hasn't it? Right? It's this working group's early days, and which was just a couple of years into Kubernetes itself, right? It's Eclipse ioFog is an old project in terms of the foundational tech, and it's not something I had realized until all of a sudden it was 2022, and I was like, oh, there's some stuff that's been in here for a while. But it's nice to see that the patterns are the same patterns everywhere, right? No matter how you approach getting your Kubernetes infrastructure down to the edge, whatever project you use, it's basically the same architectural theme, which is great. And it means we probably can standardize on some stuff.
Yeah, I think that, you say it's been out there a number of years, but I mean, Docker at this point has been out there, what, 10 or approximately 10?
Yeah.
And I think there was a movement it took maybe 4 or 5 for people to spot an opportunity and try to use it.
Yeah, that's right. 2020, like 14, 15 was pivotal times. Before that, it had been out, but you kind of had to be in the game to, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think that people are realizing that there are a lot of open source projects tied into Docker in some way that maybe can be reassembled in a modular fashion to use things going on in other areas to the benefit of users. So
yes,
not surprising.
Well, so I'll make a brief in my last couple of minutes that I have to be with you guys today. I'll make a brief so I think there's a soapbox here in my kitchen. Yeah. So let me stand on it for a moment and kind of make a pitch for where I think things can and maybe should go. You're right, Steve. Things have grown and changed, and we now know that microservices architecture exists regardless of what runtime and what form of encapsulation of the software you want to use. I would bet, and I would be willing to even lead the charge on this. I would bet that a universal agent that has the extensibility to interface with whatever software encapsulation you want, WebAssembly, Linux kernel containers, that would be something, and also can talk to whatever command system you want, whatever control plane you want. that would be something that would probably be worth making once and solid for everyone if it has all the right extensibilities in it, because of how difficult it is to get it perfect, how difficult it is to get it so stable, so secure that that you can rely on it forever. I don't think that it should be done 11 times over. And as kind of like the ringleader of one particular implementation, I'm looking and thinking, what we really want is we want edge computing components that are usable in various circumstances, that that are really designed to be switched out or extended in the way that you say start something, and then you have a modular piece of code that knows how to interface with the runtime that you want to start the
Well, you're right. I think maybe you're right. It just sounds like a great idea, but it hit me while you were making that statement that
you're like, wait, that's just one mode.
True? But often people don't ever engage in the second redo because once something gets established, it can't be 10% better. It has to be a lot better.
Exactly.
And maybe this movement towards WebAssembly is what would provoke something like that, to make people realize the need to completely do something in a new direction. That I think there are signs that people will want to do both, and you could do each with their own kind of control plane or plug-in interface point, but maybe a common one that could manage to pull off both is something that would be worthwhile. I don't know what forum would be the best for discussing that, but I think you're onto something there.
In the context, well, I think the forum's probably going to be the Eclipse Edge native working group, because it's completely back-end agnostic, and that and here we want to stay focused on things related to Kubernetes, and we will, but which is going to be, it's going to comprise a huge portion of the backends that people are using, but it won't always be 100%, right? So I'll probably take up the charge of talking about, I would call it like next unified edge architecture there. But the world that we want, I think, is
well. Here's something I take a step back when you say that I think there's an opportunity for this unification, WebAssembly to Docker. It's not just Edge. So that
absolutely
a reason for why it wouldn't go into the Eclipse Edge Foundation, but it might, but I think it's far broader than that in potential.
I think so too, and so I guess my parting statements, one I've made before, which I hope that we get to see it come true. My view is that edge computing is a chance to get all computing right. Like we need to do weird stuff on these little devices in a way that they're not even networked properly, and that's great, because maybe the middle of the OSI stack is not where we want to be configuring networks anymore. Maybe everything should be done at the layer where you have control over data flow, like at runtime. Love layer 7 networks, love them. What if that plus distributed computing controls that we get right for these things, what if that actually changes the way that we do cloud and all of the systems that are basically hosted out in the open? That would be fantastic. Unfortunately, I have to go to my next meeting. It's been really nice to just drop an update in here. I appreciate it, and I'd like to talk a lot more about all of this. Things have been super busy, but it's super great to be back in here dropping.
Well, thanks. Great presentation. Sorry you have to go, because this conversation you just provoked, I think, is worthy of coming back to for a discussion.
Well, let's come back to it. And it's pretty typical for this working group is to these things get started, right? And we could easily go for 4 hours on, and hopefully people find this stuff valuable. Let's put a pin in that then and to continue the conversation, because I think I would definitely put effort behind the new architecture.
Cool. Okay, sounds great. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. We'll see y'all later.
Take care, Kilton.
So Dan and Kate, maybe a few things we can talk about. One is Kate perhaps moving into Cindy's role as a co-chair. I had a personal email for Cindy and sent her and asked what her thoughts were on moving to the emeritus status, but I got no response at all. So I don't know is going on there. Maybe if we've gone, you know, with attempts to contact her by all the means we have, we can just do it unilaterally, but I'd rather somehow get verification that she's informed this is going on.
Yeah, I can, I haven't taken that step to reach out, but I'll do that right after this, and see, and at least give that attempt one try as well.
Okay, yeah, because
I can do it as well, yeah.
Yeah, because we noticed on her LinkedIn profile that it looks like she left Microsoft and now works at Facebook. And
yeah.
So yeah, we'll move forward with that plan to update the leadership of this working group. The other thing we've got going on is the KubeCon presentation. I actually, right now I'm on a vacation, but on the plane, I just put together a rough PowerPoint outline using the template from the conference. And really all it has is a skeleton of some agenda bullets and a close, but it needs to be filled out. And I didn't even get a chance to go through a review pass. Otherwise I would have sent out the link share to that. But we need to get onto that. We still have 6 weeks, assuming that we're going to do it physical. I looked in, by the way, to the requirements for physical. They seem to be changing. And the CNCF itself is just deferring to the requirements for entry to Spain. So talking to the CNCF leadership, it's a process where in theory, the EU is unified, but they slowly get to a point where there's some kind of consolidated policy there. And like everywhere else in the world, that kind of thing is shifting, but at least for now, it looks like you need proof of vaccination, and the definition of fully vaccinated that's in operation now is that you also have a booster. Well, I take that back. It's if you had received your 2 vaccinations very recently, you don't need a booster. But if they were done like a year ago or whatever, I don't remember the exact number of days, then you need a booster. And I believe there's a proposal to relax the booster, maybe even the vaccination requirement. Other than that, I don't think there was anything on that list that would prevent travel. I think that they are thinking the venue would require masking, but I'm not sure on that.
Yeah.
Steve, sorry, go ahead, Kate.
No, I was just going to echo. I think we'll be able to, or I think I personally will be able to make it in with those requirements. We might want to double check with Kilton, but yeah, I think it's fine to assume in person if we all feel like we can make those requirements now. And then of course, if things change and the requirements change, I'm sure KubeCon will also be understanding if that needed to switch to virtual.
Yeah. For me, I think it's a 90% chance that I'll be there physically. It got approved for travel by my employer. And my only issue now is I haven't been boosted, but I might be willing to if it looks like I have to. But I sort of, as a personal decision here, didn't think, I've got nothing against it, but it just didn't seem like, based on people I know who got it and still got COVID afterwards, convinced me it was completely worth it. But you know, I still have time to decide if I'm just going to wait it out until maybe 3 weeks before, because it looks like I could just get it before I go and I'd be okay. So I'm going to just keep an eye on it for the next few weeks to see whether the policy changes, but I'd expect that I'll be able to go. And in fact, I've got a bunch of other things going on there too. There is that Kubernetes on the Edge day, and I might be opening and closing that conference. So I'd have to be there for that because that's anticipated to be physical. And then I've got a couple other speaking sessions at KubeCon too. So anything else we want to talk about?
So I just on this topic, I've been a little bit out of the loop with the KubeCon presentation, and I yeah was too busy with other stuff. So
So the
what are you guys
agenda
doing?
was device management and discovery on the edge. I think it was called device onboarding and management, something like that. I don't have it right in front of me. I think if you go back in the Slack channel, I shared the link to Google Doc, and it has whatever we proposed to the CNCF. And you've been through this, so you know that
Yeah.
you kind of have a rough agenda, but it was drafted in a way that we have some level of flexibility into where we go with that. It's just under the broad umbrella of this was covering devices, and I think the idea was devices could be things like sensors, cameras, and devices. The way it was worded could even be interpreted to include the hardware that hosts your Kubernetes nodes if you're running Kubernetes at the edge, or if you're in a context where what's at edge is not a Kubernetes node, but still is managed in some way by Kubernetes. The umbrella of the agenda we put out there is big enough to talk about that as well.
Yeah, and I think
So-
that right there is a great intro to the talk, is like terms and what we're talking
Yeah.
about. Like the word device, I think, is so overloaded. And I think clarifying that as a presentation topic and just would be interesting as well. And then moving into each of those subcategories.
Yeah. And I think that we wanted to do some coverage of, I would like to get this to cover the secure device onboard process, this idea that in reality for edge at scale, a lot of people expect to buy hardware devices, through a distribution chain, yet somehow end up with it successfully deployed with either nobody or somebody with very little training and skill set out at that edge location, just kind of somebody who can plug in power, plug in a network connection, maybe look at whatever physical status might be there, which could just be as little as some flashing lights, and somehow get that device to come boot itself up, bringing itself up to the point where it's remotely manageable. And it's kind of the same story if you have a device failure. And we'll just do a broad setting of the terrain of what open source projects are out there. And,
That sounds good.
to do
I've done
that-
some work with SDO as well. I've used it a little,
Okay.
so I can talk about that if we need. Yeah, we explored it a little bit. So the whole setting up the rendezvous
Yeah.
service and getting that flow working.
I started an attempt at doing that, and I found that has been really in transition, and a lot of it is by design, where that project's made a conscious decision that rather than be one of these things that goes spec first and then they do an implementation, that in a way they seem to be operating in a mode where often the reality turns out to be this, that the first implementation is the spec. So, and they've been doing drops maybe as often as monthly. So the thing is just completely moving around. And they had a demonstration thing that I started down the path in January of trying to get one done, but I had my day job, so wasn't giving it full time. But I never was successful at actually synthesizing an actual deployment, but I think it was just on me, not so much on the project, but I'm meant to go back to that. And maybe even the story of what's involved in that. I think that their version numbering is less than a 1.0, I believe, and implying that maybe it isn't, in its final form. But just recounting what the status of that is for those interested, I think would be useful to the community.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to know the status. I was working with it 2 years ago. I don't think there was really even much public documentation. So, and what you were saying about it not being spec first, I couldn't really put to words what was off about it sometimes, but that's definitely how it felt, a lot of reverse engineering, what's
Yeah,
happening there.
And like you, when you go that thing, that direction, the last thing to get updated is the docs. But if you're trying to adopt it, that's kind of the first thing you want to go to. So yeah, it was out there. I didn't try to avail myself of their Slack forum to ask questions because I've seen other projects that got into an operating mode like that. And that's really how you have to go about it, is just go out there and ask questions. But yeah, that should be one thing we should cover, because that's certainly within the scope of kind of the idea of getting these edge locations booted up and to the point where you can be using Kubernetes to manage them and operate services that are consuming things generated out at the edge. So beyond, if that answered your question as to what the scope of this is, and any ideas
Yeah, awesome.
you might have for shaping the agenda. Kilton was unclear whether he'd be there, but I think he said he wanted a role of maybe doing a demo at the end. So, because it would give him the flexibility. To be honest, when you do a demo, I found that often you want those to be recorded regardless, particularly with this edge stuff, because counting on conference Wi-Fi and things like that is kind of a little optimistic. So maybe Kate and I can talk, set the table for, the broad overviews, and maybe dig a little deeper into selected projects. If you want to put in Acri and what you're working on personally, that would be good to have a subject matter expert go into some of these. And we don't want to call favorites, but just pointing them out as a deeper dive into one example, I think is perfectly fair. As long as you mentioned that there's a couple others out there, if there are, and we'll shape it that way.
Yeah, I'll be happy to review anything, and anything you guys put up, and give suggestions and help with the content. Yeah, I won't be at the KubeCon, so yeah, but
okay,
happy to help.
And that's it for me for agenda items for today. If either you have other things you'd like to discuss.
Nothing in particular. I just wanted to close out that previous, should we, you, Steve, me, and Kilton maybe start a channel and kind of organize when we want to bring this deck together?
Yeah, I think so. I'm on vacation through this week, so Monday I'll put out a link to the document. Are you, traditionally when we've done this through Google Docs because everybody can get to those, but I actually prefer to work on the Microsoft stack, and I think Kilton's okay with it too. So, and I assume maybe you are in that situation too. I'm just more experienced in PowerPoint and have found that I'm capable of using features that are in PowerPoint that aren't in the Google slides. So, but I'm open to whatever you want to use for sharing, but I propose that we put a deck out there in some shared form, and then we can use Slack DMs with a 3-person group, or maybe we'll add Dion if he's volunteering to be a reviewer. That would be really useful. Yeah, and we can use Slack so that we can do it asynchronously, right? And we might end up wanting to do some Zoom meeting as we get closer, but that is how these have been done in the past. So that is a good plan, and it's worked before. Good. The other thing, we've done these before at physical conferences, and we usually end up doing a final rehearsal in person at the conference venue. Because sometimes when you go through kind of that actual run with live people trying to do it, you find a few flaws. And I've usually found a guinea pig audience member so that if we're there in person, we can maybe meet the day before and just do a dry run of presenting it before we go on stage. So I'd like to do that if we can manage to get a time to do it a single
Sounds
person
good.
volunteer audience. Okay, if that's it, maybe we'll end this meeting 16 minutes early. Last call if anybody's got anything else they want to chat about. Okay, well, thanks everybody for attending. Great meeting, even if it was shortened. See you next time.
Bye,
Take care,
everyone.
folks.